Let's go ahead and revisit exactly what U.S. President Donald Trump posted on his social media platform, Truth Social. We have completed our very successful attack on the 3 nuclear sites in Iran, including Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. A full payload of bombs was dropped on the primary site, Fordow. All planes are safely on their way home. Congratulations to our great American warriors. There is not another military in the world that could have done this. Now is the time for peace. Thank you for your attention to this matter. All right, Hamda Salhoud's joining us now from Jordan's capital. She's in Amman because Israel's government has banned Al Jazeera from reporting inside Israel and the occupied West Bank. So, Hamda, we've known for a while now that Israeli officials have been calling on the U.S. to support their efforts, their conflict with Iran. Now we have confirmation from the U.S. president, from Donald Trump, that the U.S. has struck 3 nuclear sites inside of Iran. Are we hearing anything from Israel at this stage?
Well, we aren't getting much from Israeli officials just yet because it is late, around 3 a.m. local time. But look, let's just give you some background and some context. Since Israel decided to attack Iran 9 days ago, they had been saying that they do want the Americans to get involved in this. This is what was being pushed in Israeli media. There were banners that were being put up across places in Israel, unclear by who, calling on President Trump to, quote, finish the job. So it's important to note also that within the last day, reports have emerged of Israeli officials having a call with people in the Trump administration, but not President Trump himself, that Israel was growing impatient with the U.S. not deciding if they were going to get involved or not, that they didn't want to wait 2 weeks, this 2-week deadline that President Trump had previously given, that the Israelis were considering attacking the Fordow site on their own. But it's worth mentioning that this is a site that's, 1, incredibly secretive, 2, mainly underground, and 3, it's deep in the mountains. It's dug up in the side of a mountain. So the Israelis didn't even know if they have the capabilities to do that, which is why they wanted the Americans to come in with their weaponry, with their bunker-busting bombs to attack this site. So the Israelis were considering doing this already on their own. Netanyahu said that it was not off the table once Israel started striking it on, but they were still waiting for U.S. support. And Netanyahu had said while visiting a building that was struck by an Iranian missile that this war would continue with or without the American support, with or without the American weaponry that could be dropped if they continued, or they considered rather, conducting their own airstrikes. But this is something the Israelis wanted from the very beginning. Both Israel and the United States have said that they don't want Israel to acquire a nuclear weapon, and they don't want Iran to have any sort of capability to enrich uranium, which is what they're doing primarily at this nuclear site and sites that were struck. So this is surely going to be received well in Israel as part of their prolonged campaign, they say, against Iran.
Hamda, just stay with us for a moment, if you will. On your screens right now, you can see the 3 nuclear sites that President Donald Trump says the U.S. has attacked. U.S. forces have hit Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. The Natanz site is Iran's main uranium enrichment site. Fordow is another facility where nuclear fuel can be purified, and Isfahan is a site that Iran uses to convert uranium. Now, Hamda, with regard to Israeli officials, as you mentioned a moment ago, we know that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, as well as other government leaders in Israel, have indicated that they were going to continue attacking Iran, whether the U.S. entered the conflict or not. Now that we know that the U.S. has entered the conflict by targeting these 3 sites in Iran, is there any indication from what we've heard from Israelis in the past week or so what they would do if the U.S. enters this conflict in essentially just one type of strike and then comes out of it? Would they continue then attacking Iran? Have they said they would continue? Or would they consider potentially stopping and seeing what the U.S. might want them to do going forward?
Well, there hasn't been anything specific in terms of what the Israelis would do if the Americans conducted their own strikes. But if you know anything about the Israeli government, the Israeli military, and their conduct in these recent wars that they have started within the last several years, they say that they're going to continue until, quote, the job is done. This is something Netanyahu himself has said. All of his defense ministers, his army chiefs of staff, that they have a job to complete, whether that was in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Syria, in the occupied West Bank, and now in Iran, which is why military officials have said that this is going to be a prolonged campaign based on the information they have, based on the sites that they want to attack, and also based on what they regard as success within the first 9 days of the attacks across Iran. Benjamin Netanyahu has said that for some time this was on his mind. This is something the Israelis have wanted to do. And his army chief of staff, while speaking yesterday, had said that while this will be a prolonged campaign, it's because they say Israel had intelligence about Iran reaching some sort of point of no return with uranium enrichment and with the acquisition of an entire nuclear weapon, which is why they decided to move forward with those strikes at that time, even though it was something that had been planned. There was something in the works with the Israeli military for years prior. This is a conversation that the Israelis have been having for a long time. It's nothing new within Israel. And remember that Israel largely accuses Iran of arming and supporting other sorts of groups throughout the region like Hamas and Hezbollah, saying that this was also part of the reason that they wanted to attack different strategic military and nuclear facilities inside of Iran. But the military has said in the last couple of days that their work isn't finished, meaning that they're trying to destroy all of the weapons capabilities as well. The Israeli army says they've destroyed at least 3 Iranian fighter jets, as well as nearly 1,000 drones and other sort of ballistic missile capabilities and different arsenals that are across the country. So Israel says they're still going to continue doing this. This has been something on their minds, these types of strikes that they have wanted to conduct. And there are mixed reviews within Israel about how Israel is going to proceed moving forward, how the government is going to handle yet another war that has been started by the government. So moving forward, you can surely see Israeli government support for the American involvement now in this war. But it'll be interesting to see how the Iranians will respond to this, what type of attacks they'll conduct in retaliation, not just towards Israel and towards places like Tel Aviv, but also against perhaps American targets in the region.
All right, that's Al Jazeera's Hamda Salhoud joining us from Amman. Thanks so much, Hamda. Joining us once again now in the studio is our correspondent, Dorsa Jabari, who's reported extensively from Iran and on Iran over the years. Dorsa, are we hearing anything new from Iranian officials at this hour?
No, we haven't heard any reaction or even confirmation that these strikes have taken place. The only information that is being shared on the social media channels belonging to official and semi-official news agencies inside Iran, they're just quoting Donald Trump's Truth Social post. There has been no reaction or confirmation even from the Iranian side.
Dorsa, you were speaking earlier specifically about those sites that have been hit and targeted by the U.S. I wonder if you could just bring our viewers up to date as to where Iran's nuclear program and where the nuclear sites were as far as their capability in the run-up to all this in the past week after Israel started attacking and before the U.S. entered the fray.
Well, Iran has 6 nuclear facilities across the country. The 3 that were hit this evening by the Americans they're the 3 most critical components of Iran's nuclear program. The site in Natanz, it is the biggest facility they have. It is home to the biggest part of the nuclear program. They have the most centrifuges, and it is one of 2 facilities that enriches uranium. The other site is Fordow, that is near the city of Qom. This is the 2nd enrichment facility that Iran has in its nuclear program. These 2 sites were enriching uranium at 60% levels. Isfahan facility is also another critical component in the program. It is a uranium conversion facility that also stores most of Iran's highly enriched uranium stockpile. According to the latest report by the IAEA, Iran has about 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium at 60% that they have kept inside the country, and it is believed that this is where it was stored. So these three locations that the American president claims they have hit is critical. But one thing we have to remember, of the 6 facilities, 5 of them, these 5 sites have already been targeted by Israeli airstrikes. Now, Fordow, because of the way it was designed, it's about 80 meters deep underground, the facility. The attacks Israel has carried out, and this is according to the IAEA, the UN nuclear watchdog, they have been in and around Fordow, not directly at Fordow. So we know that the Israelis, both according to the IAEA and the Israeli officials and the Iranian Atomic Energy Organization, they have targeted Arak heavy water reactor that has not been operational for years since the 2015 nuclear deal was signed. It went offline as a part of that agreement. They targeted the Tehran nuclear research reactor as well. They've targeted Natanz a number of times. This is the Israelis prior to this attack by the Americans. They have also attacked Isfahan facility, and they attacked, or they tried to attack Fordow. So 5 out of 6. The only nuclear facility that has not been targeted inside Iran is the Bushehr nuclear power plant. This is a facility that is in the southern part of the country, and it has not come under attack. And one of the reasons many people have been speculating is that because if that facility is targeted, the radiation ramifications would be catastrophic for the entire region.
Dorsa, thanks so much for all your reporting. We'll be coming back to you for more details shortly. Let's talk now to Heidi Jo Castro in Washington, D.C. Heidi, what else are we hearing now from U.S. officials or from U.S. President Donald Trump when it comes to the news that broke just a short while ago that the U.S. had struck 3 nuclear facilities in Iran?
Well, Mohammed, now Donald Trump has taken to Truth Social again, announcing that he will be addressing the American public about these U.S. strikes on Iran's nuclear sites in about an hour and a half's time. He went on to say this is a very successful military operation in Iran. This is a historic moment for the United States of America, Israel, and the world. Iran must now agree to end this war. Thank you. Those word for word from his latest Truth Social post. And so when he does speak to the American public during prime time in about a little over an hour's time, he will not only have to be explaining these strikes, but as well as trying to sell it, really, that it was a good idea to the American public. You know, this is the first time that the U.S. has directly bombed Iran, a major infrastructure, since the Iranian Revolution. And this is something, in fact, that a series of American presidents from both parties have tried to avoid up until this point. Donald Trump is calling it a historic moment again. He says not only for the U.S., but for Israel and for the world. So certainly trying to sell this as having made the right call. That is also being echoed by some of his supporters, including Senator Lindsey Graham, who is an Iran hawk, saying that this was the right call on X. But whether or not the U.S. public believes that as well remains to be seen. They were really mixed going into this. There was sparse polling before this action was taken on whether the U.S. should directly strike Iran. And the Washington Post conducting a poll finding that most people who answered that said that the U.S. should not be taking this route because it would be opening a new dangerous phase of the war. Many Americans, though, 30% at that time, said they simply didn't know. This is not something that's been top of mind for the U.S. public. So much other domestic headlines taking that attention away. But now, front and center, as Trump will talk about this directly to the American public in about an hour and a half.
Yeah, Heidi, and as you mentioned, there has been this growing divide within Donald Trump's base, some who are isolationists and some who wanted to see an attack on Iran, and this debate going on within the administration as to what was the best course of action. I want to ask you specifically about another debate that's been going on inside the U.S. the last several days, which is if Trump actually had the sole authority to launch military strikes on Iran, because there are many who say that Trump would have needed approval from Congress before taking this kind of action, right?
Right, especially now that this could be seen as a declaration of war, which is the sole power of the U.S. Congress, if you read the Constitution strictly. However, historically and in practical terms, U.S. presidents in the recent past have taken have warranted U.S. military strikes on foreign targets in the past without consulting Congress. Congress was in the middle of perhaps taking action to try to prevent this, but a few voices of dissent among Republicans saying that this was not our war, not the U.S.'s war. Obviously, Trump beat them to the punch, in fact, surprising almost everyone, given that he had initially said that Iran would have up to 2 weeks time to come back to the negotiation table, find a diplomatic solution, and avoid a direct airstrike from the U.S. And then for this to happen just days into that window certainly also cut off much opportunity for dissent among his own party and within his own country.
All right, Heidi, stay with us. That's Heidi Jo Castro out of Washington, D.C. for us with all the latest. We'll be coming back to you. Let's go now to Bill Courtney. He's a former U.S. ambassador and nuclear negotiator. He's also an adjunct senior fellow with RAND, which is a nonprofit think tank. He joins us now live from Washington, D.C. Bill, thanks for being with us. Let me ask you first, when it comes to what's just happened, this confirmation from U.S. President Donald Trump that the U.S. has struck these 3 nuclear facilities in Iran, what does that do when it comes to the geopolitical situation going forward, when it comes to regional tensions? How do you foresee all this playing out?
It's a bit early to foresee those sorts of things, but it's important to realize that for several decades now, the U.S. and the West have sought to get Iran to end its nuclear weapons program, its enrichment program. And while in 2015 there was an agreement that might have slowed it down, it held no prospect to end it. So President Trump has taken an action really seeming to aim to do something that could bring it into the program, although more will be required than this.
Bill, you say that this action, at least is being seen by the administration, that it would bring an end to some of these problems. But the Iranians have said over and over again that if Washington were to join the conflict, that would have severe repercussions. I mean, what is the situation when it comes to U.S. credibility in the Middle East right now and concerns about its credibility going forward?
So there will be in the Middle East a number of people who are outraged that the U.S. is once again engaging in a Middle Eastern war. But for those who are concerned about Iran's nuclear breakout potential, such as the Saudis and some other countries in the Persian Gulf, they will see now U.S. power as more credible and more apt to be relied upon than in the past.
Bill, you had a situation in the past few days where you essentially had a U.S. president, Donald Trump, rebuking the head of his intelligence agencies, Tulsi Gabbard. You'd had Tulsi Gabbard testify a few months ago that the assessment was that Iran was not trying to build a nuclear bomb. Trump was asked about that in the run-up to these strikes, and he said that he didn't believe that was the case. When you have this play out publicly, a sitting president questioning and then denying, essentially, the assessment from his spy chief, I mean, what does that say about the inner workings of the government in Washington?
Well, it suggests there may have been other factors at work beyond the intelligence assessment. You know, in some sense, let's remember that we're talking about enriching uranium. The U.S. dropped a uranium bomb on Hiroshima in 1945 and did not need to do testing, nuclear tests before that. So it is possible that the Iranians, if they have highly enriched uranium, and that can be available to them sufficiently high at 90% in just a couple of weeks, the Iranians might be able to put together a bomb without testing it.
Bill, are there any indications coming out from what you're seeing right now from the statements from Donald Trump and potentially others in the administration? We know that Donald Trump is going to be giving an address to the U.S. in a little over an hour from now. At least that's what he's announced. But based on what you're seeing thus far, is there any indication that the U.S. plans to continue bombing Iran? Or at this stage, does it look like this was a one-and-done operation?
It's too soon to tell. Partly it will depend on whether Fordow was fully penetrated. Each B-2 bomber flying from Diego Garcia could carry 2 of these 30,000-pound massive ordnance penetrators. Fordow would have required more than 1 or 2 probably to be fully destroyed. So we'll have to see what is the battle damage assessment from this strike on Fordow, and that could have something to do with whether the U.S. continues a bombing effort.
All right, Bill, just stay with us. We're going to come back to you with more questions shortly. Right now, I want to go back to Dorsa Jabari, who is joining us here in the studio. She's our correspondent who's reported extensively both from Iran and on Iran in years past. Dorsa, this is a moment that many were questioning if it would happen. We know now that the U.S. has bombed 3 sites in Iran. What were we hearing from Iranian officials before this action was taken as to what the repercussions might be?
Well, we had heard from the Iranian foreign minister, we had heard from the Iranian president, we had heard from Iranian military officials who had reiterated over and over again, if the United States gets directly involved in this conflict, then the U.S. military bases in the region, in the Middle East, will become legitimate targets for Iran. Now, the United States has about 40,000 military personnel in this region, and they have 19 military bases, 8 of which are permanent. These military infrastructure and facilities are what Iran will now call legitimate targets as a result of what the United States military has just carried out in Iran.
And Dorsa, we've seen now that U.S. President Donald Trump has also posted on his Truth Social account, Iran must now agree to end this war. But certainly, in the run-up to all this, what we've heard from Iranians is that if the U.S. were to get involved, that's only going to escalate the situation. How do you foresee the Iranians reacting to a message like this?
Well, this is going to be seen as yet another attempt by the United States to negotiate or to force Iran to come to the negotiating table through force. And they've said that even the discussions between Iran and the United States will not continue while Israel is bombing Iran, because they held the United States accountable for Israel attacking Iran from June 13th. So even before the United States was directly involved, the Iranians blamed them for being indirectly involved, having given the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, the green light to start attacking Iran. So Iran is going to see this as an act of war. It's going to be very difficult for anyone to convince Iranian officials to see any kind of an off-ramp from full confrontation between Iran and the United States.
Yeah, Dorsa, when it comes to diplomacy, obviously we know that will be tricky. It's been tricky up to this point. It would certainly be trickier going forward. When it comes to any type of off-ramp to this conflict, is there any scenario by which any international actor might be able to try to de-escalate this situation right now?
I think we've crossed those lines. I mean, things have happened in Iran that nobody even imagined would happen. Israel attacking energy infrastructure, nuclear facilities, assassinating nuclear scientists, all the top level members of Iran's Revolutionary Guard. These were all acts carried out by Israel inside Iran without any prior warning. So any kind of a political off-ramp is very, very difficult to see now. But of course, diplomacy is never dead completely. There is always hope for diplomacy. And it is now going to be up to the regional countries to really step up and try to mediate some kind of a resolution in this conflict, because it is no longer just Iran and the U.S. and Israel. The entire region is at risk.
Dorsa, in the last couple of hours, you were on set with me and you were describing the mood in Iran. We were playing sound bites from some of the people who'd been injured in those strikes by Israel in the last week. I'm curious if you could tell our viewers about what the sentiment has been, what you've been hearing from your sources on the ground as to the mood, how concerned people are, both when it was just Israel attacking Iran and in the run-up to the potential of the U.S. attacking Iran, which now we know has happened.
There was a lot of fear and anger, but there was also unity. The fear was about not knowing what they could do. The general public, this is a country of just over 90 million people, the general public really were not prepared for this kind of conflict. The last time bombs dropped on the capital, Tehran, was during the Iran-Iraq War between 1980 and 1988. And it was not even close to the scale of what we're seeing now and how fast Israel and continuously has been attacking various positions in Iran. So people were not really prepared on any level. So it came as a very much a shock and surprise. And then there was anger about how this could have happened. The international community remained completely silent. All the Western countries have yet to even condemn Israel's acts in Iran. So there was a lot of anger, and this has united the country. The general population, whatever differences they may have had from whichever side of the political spectrum they sit on, these events of the past 9 days has really rallied the national interest, the feeling of this is a nation at war, and people need to rally behind the flag in order to get through it, and that is what we've seen.
All right, Dorsa, stay with us. We're going to come back to you for the moment. That's Dorsa Jabari, our correspondent, live on set with us. We'll be coming back to you shortly. Let's revisit now exactly what U.S. President Donald Trump posted on his social media platform, Truth Social. We have completed our very successful attack on the 3 nuclear sites in Iran, including Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. A full payload of bombs was dropped on the primary site, Fordow. All planes are safely on their way home. Congratulations to our great American warriors. There is not another military in the world that could have done this. Now is the time for peace. Thank you for your attention to this matter. All right, let's go back now to Bill Courtney. He's a former U.S. ambassador and nuclear negotiator. He's also an adjunct senior fellow with RAND, which is a nonprofit think tank. He joins us from Washington, D.C. Of course, a lot of moving parts right now, Bill. The president, Donald Trump, has said that he's going to be addressing the country in the coming hour. Obviously, this is a time of, some would say, political peril for Trump because there is a split amongst his base, some with more isolationist tendencies that did not want to see him enter the war in Iran, others that did want to see him go to war in Iran and attack nuclear sites. What do you expect we might be hearing from Trump in the hours ahead?
President Trump will likely want to recount what happened, probably provide a bit more detail about what has happened, and try to rally Americans around to the idea that, this is something that was necessary. It had to take place, and only the U.S. could have helped destroy the Fordow complex deep under a mountain. I don't know how much history he'll talk about, but it is useful to remember that both North Korea and Iran were rogue nuclear states. But the West did not feel it could attack North Korea's nuclear program militarily, because North Korea had so much conventional military capability that it could have, for example, have destroyed much of Seoul, Korea, the capital city. So North Korea ended up developing itself as a nuclear power. Now the issue is with Iran. Does the West want to use force to prevent Iran from becoming another North Korea or not? Views have been divided on that. Certainly in the United States, Republicans and Democrats are divided, and Europeans. So President Trump tonight will probably try to rally everyone around the notion that this really had to be done, that as numerous senior Democratic and Republican leaders have said in recent decades, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. And so President Trump will probably say he's made good on a pledge that a lot of American leaders have made.
Bill, President Trump is somebody who he was publicly quoted many times in the past criticizing the U.S. war in Iraq. And in the last several days, there are many critics of the administration who have said that they believed that the same playbook leading up to the strikes in Iran was being utilized as had been utilized in the run-up to the war on Iraq. The fact that Trump had so publicly criticized previous administrations for the U.S. war in Iraq, how would it make it easy for him to try to sell to his base now that the U.S. is now bombing Iran?
So let's remember 9/11, 2001. Prior to 9/11, President George W. Bush made quite clear numerous times that the Bush administration would not be interested in nation building in countries that were very unstable. Then 9/11 took place. Al-Qaeda was operating from Afghanistan. President George W. Bush reversed a lot of his things that he said before, and the U.S. went in to destroy Al-Qaeda and also to take down the Taliban, which had been husbanding Al-Qaeda. So sometimes presidents, for national security or other reasons, have to rise to the moment. And President Trump now probably is going to seek to portray that he has risen to the moment.
Bill, Trump posted a short while ago on his Truth Social account, Iran must now agree to end this war. How does Trump expect that Iran would come back to the table now and engage in diplomacy with the U.S. after the U.S. has taken this action? I mean, do you expect that Trump really believes that a diplomatic channel to Iran from the U.S. is open at this stage?
For several decades, the West has tried to negotiate, as I mentioned before, the elimination of the nuclear effort in Iran, and that has never succeeded, mainly because the West did not have enough leverage. For example, economic sanctions were not enough leverage to induce Iran to give up its nuclear program. So now military force is being used by Israel and the United States. Iran is much weaker militarily now. Israel has destroyed a lot of its capability, and now the U.S. is bombing the hard target sites. So Iran is much weaker than it was before. The West, the U.S., have more credibility now, more leverage, so that could change prospects for any negotiated outcome.
All right, that's Bill Courtney, who's a former U.S. ambassador and nuclear negotiator. He's also an adjunct senior fellow with the nonprofit RAND. He was joining us from Washington, D.C. Thanks so much, Bill. All right, let's go now to Hamda Salhoud, who's joining us from Jordan's capital. She's in Amman because Israel's government has banned Al Jazeera from reporting inside Israel and the occupied West Bank. Hamda, are we hearing anything new from Israeli officials regarding the confirmation from the U.S. that they have struck 3 nuclear sites in Iran?
Well, no official confirmation from Israeli officials, but anonymous sources have been speaking to Israeli media saying that the United States fully coordinated these airstrikes with the Israelis. They were informed about them ahead of time, and that there was cooperation together on these most recent airstrikes. It's worth mentioning that there have been reports within Israeli media in the last couple of days, specifically in the last several hours leading up to these American attacks, that there was a lot of frustration on the Israeli side that they did not want to wait another 2 weeks for an American decision on whether or not they would get involved in Israel's war on Iran, saying that the Israeli prime minister never ruled out on attacking the Fordow site in Iran, the main part of their nuclear program, but that they needed American weaponry to do so because of how far underground it is. But Netanyahu still didn't rule it out. So they were hoping for American involvement. Some reports also indicate that they knew it was going to happen, but just were waiting for the green light from U.S. President Donald Trump. Israel has said that this is going to be a prolonged campaign against Iran, unlikely that it would end quickly as some had hoped. And the Israeli Army Chief of Staff had also said just within the last 36 hours that Israel had had these plans for a long time, and they were just waiting for the right time to do so, saying that they had some sort of intelligence that Iran was reaching a point of no return with their nuclear program, all while negotiations were ongoing. The Americans had previously told the Iranians that they wanted some sort of deadline from them as well for the talks, but the Iranians said that they weren't going to conduct any sort of talks while they were still under Israeli fire and while there were still bombs being dropped all over Iran. So according to Israel, they say that this war is going to continue. It's going to be a long, prolonged campaign. They're going to continue targeting nuclear sites, military sites, and other sort of military and IRGC officials, and that they were going to continue conducting any sort of action that made them feel safe, even though there are still many other wars that Israel is involved in that are still open-ended and ongoing. Israel says that within the last 9 days, they have destroyed more than 1,000 Iranian drones from airstrikes, not ones that were intercepted, but from airstrikes that they had conducted across Iranian territory, saying that they're also trying to deplete their ballistic missile capabilities by bombing those arsenals as well, and by trying to kill off really any of these Iranian officials and nuclear scientists who are involved in the military and the nuclear facilities. So while there still, again, hasn't been any official reaction from the Israelis because it is past 3 a.m. local time, you can expect the Israeli Prime Minister, the Defense Minister, and the Army Chief of Staff to come out in the coming hours in praise of this American decision, saying that they're working now in tandem to destroy Iran's nuclear capabilities.
All right, that's Al Jazeera's Hamda Salhoud joining us live from Amman. Hamda, stay with us. We'll be coming back to you with more questions shortly. Let's go now back to Dorsa Jabari, who's with us here in the studio. Dorsa, of course, has reported extensively on Iran and from Iran over the years. Dorsa, I want to ask you specifically about a post from Donald Trump on his Truth Social page, in which he said Iran must now agree to end this war. Obviously, we've been speaking in the last hour. Iran has been very clear that if the U.S. were to enter the fray, that essentially that would stop all diplomacy. What do we expect the Iranians to say to a post like this?
I don't think they're going to take it very seriously. I think, given everything that's happened, this is the U.S. president basically forcing peace through an act of aggression on a sovereign nation. And the Iranians have been very clear, if the United States does this, then their military interests in the region and their personnel are fair targets for the Iranians. There is about 40,000 U.S. troops stationed in the Middle East. There are 19 U.S. bases in the region. 8 of them are permanent ones. And for the Iranians and their proxies, these are now legitimate targets. Now, I just want to mention that in the past few minutes, we have heard from the political deputy to Iran's state TV chief, who says that Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan have been evacuated prior to this attack. We had also heard from another high-ranking Iranian official, Mohsen Rezai. He was a former presidential candidate, and he said that all the sensitive material had been moved from the nuclear facilities. So we're getting indications of how prepared the Iranians were for this eventuality, which has now happened.
Dorsa, I want to just talk briefly about the mood inside Iran again with you. As we know, the opposition in Iran has been pretty fractured over the years. There's been a lot of speculation as to what Israeli strikes on Iran would do when it comes to the opposition, and then if the U.S. were to enter the fray, what that might do when it comes to opposition to the government. What have these attacks on Iran actually done? Has there been a rallying around the flag effect? Have people been uniting more than in the past?
Absolutely. It has completely united the entire country, the society. If there were any divisions before this, they have all been put aside. This has forced Iranians to remember, first and foremost, that they are a nation and they have to stay united in the face of this aggression. This is something Iranians have not seen since the Iran-Iraq War, which went on for 8 years between 1980 and 1988. And whatever criticism there was of the government or the system has all been forgotten or put aside, at least during this time, and really highlighted that this is a nation that stands behind the flag. And it is important for all Iranians to come together and during this very difficult time. And still, Iranians are in shock of what is happening in their country. I've spoken to people who still can't believe this is unfolding. And with the U.S. now entering into this conflict, they can only imagine things are only going to get worse, not better.
Dorsa, we heard from Hamda Salhoud reporting for us from Amman a few minutes ago, and she was talking about Israeli officials and how there had been an expectation in Israel, at least behind the scenes, that the U.S. would enter the fray and would be supporting Israel's effort in Iran. Based on what you observed, based on who you've been speaking with, what you've been reporting the past 9 days or so, was there an expectation amongst Iranian officials that the U.S. actually would bomb nuclear sites in Iran?
I don't think anybody really thought it would be a reality up until maybe a few days ago. These talks in Geneva became sort of what many thought was a trap for the Iranians. It would provide an opportunity for Donald Trump to say, we tried diplomacy yet again, and they didn't accept our offer. And their offer, we have to remind our viewers, was something Iran was never going to accept. Basically to give up its entire nuclear program, which Iran has had since the 1970s, or the 60s rather. So for the United States to demand a complete surrender from the Iranians while the Israelis are carrying out strikes across the country was never going to happen. The Iranian foreign minister making it very clear in Geneva on Friday when he met with the E3, that is the foreign ministers of UK, France and Germany, that Iran is willing to negotiate its nuclear program and have certain limits put in place, just like we saw in 2015, the nuclear deal that was signed between Iran and the world powers, which limited its nuclear program and had added transparency with the International Atomic Energy Agency in return for sanctions relief. But Donald Trump left that deal in 2018. So really, Iran has had very little trust and faith in the United States government, and that they would really uphold any deal that they'd agreed to. And then the U.S. really moved the goalposts. They had 5 rounds of discussions, negotiations between Iran and the U.S. indirectly. So that started in April. And the Americans initially said they wanted to reduce Iran's enrichment capabilities. It is currently at 60%. And Iran was willing to negotiate that. Under the 2015 nuclear deal, they agreed Iran would enrich uranium at 3.67%. And most of the uranium stockpile would not stay in the country. And the Iranians were ready to negotiate around those figures. But the Americans, about halfway through those discussions, decided, no, we now want zero enrichment in Iran. The U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff started speaking to U.S. media and saying any enrichment in Iran is unacceptable for us. And the Iranians said, well, this is not something we're going to agree to ever. It is a red line. So we started this cycle of back and forth. They had red lines, Iran had red lines, and there was no middle ground. There was no room. And the Iranians now believe, most of the officials that have been speaking, they say this was all a pretext. This was all a elaborated plan that involved Israel. And Benjamin Netanyahu's ultimate goal was to strike Iran. He's been talking about this since the early 1990s, that Iran's nuclear program is an existential threat to Israel. And his aim was to do exactly what he's been doing over the past 9 days. And his ultimate goal was to get the U.S. to strike these facilities because they have the military hardware and capabilities that Israel doesn't.
Dorsa, you mentioned a moment ago that there were some Iranian officials that had suggested that the Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan nuclear sites had been evacuated already prior to these strikes from the U.S. Speak to us about the level of preparation in Iran when it comes to these strikes potentially taking place. How prepared were they with these looming strikes?
I think all levels of officials within Iran's atomic energy organization, once Israel started attacking Iran on June 13th, there was protocols that were followed. And first of all, they're in constant communication with the International Atomic Energy Agency. So every strike that is targeted, every nuclear facility that is targeted, it is immediately reported to the agency. The agency has inspectors that are permanently based in Iran. So if it is possible, they will check radiation levels around the facility if it's safe for them to do so. And they will report on the amount of damage or impact these strikes have had. And until now, the statements from the agency have been that there has been certain amount of damage caused, but there's no alarm in terms of radiation. And we understand that there was protocols that were followed, that Iran, the officials in Iran would have moved the sensitive material, evacuated the staff out of these facilities when the attacks began in June 13th. So that is in line with what we have been hearing over the past few days.
Dorsa, if you could just tell our viewers about where Iran's defensive capabilities lie right now. Obviously, Israel struck. There were a lot of sites that were damaged. There were a lot of reports that Iran's military and some of their military capabilities had been weakened substantially. Where do things stand right now when it comes to Iran's military and Iran's defensive capabilities?
Well, Iran maintains that it is still able to respond to Israel and also respond to the United States. There was a lot of speculation about how much Israel has managed to destroy within Iran's defensive capabilities. First, it's very difficult to verify that information. But based on what the Iranian officials have been saying, there have been sites, numerous sites targeted around the country that belong to the Defense Ministry, the Revolutionary Guards, as well as the facilities that house that belongs to the country's defense ministry. They say, the Iranians have said that they have not sustained significant damage, and that the missiles that they continue to launch towards Israel on a daily basis is evidence that Iran is still very much able to defend itself and continue this fight, and now quite possibly expand the scope of this conflict.
And Dorsa, we were talking earlier about diplomatic channels. I mean, the U.S. seems to be indicating that they would still be open to talking to the Iranians. The Iranians, it seems pretty clear that up until this strike had said that if the U.S. strikes Iran, that meant that they weren't going to come back to the table with the U.S. going forward. Where do you think things stand diplomatically right now? Whether or not it's the U.S. speaking to Iran, are there other actors, members of the EU or other countries that could help de-escalate the situation?
I think there have been two actors that have been actively involved in trying to de-escalate. First of all, a number of countries in the Middle East, but mainly Oman and Qatar, have been playing the mediating role between Iran and the United States. We also know that Saudi Arabia has also been involved in trying to find an off-ramp in this conflict. So I think it is really up to these countries in the region that are going to possibly be directly seeing the result of any kind of an expansion in this conflict. They're going to be the ones that have to play the biggest role in trying to find a political off-ramp.
Dorsa, is there any indication at this hour from Iranian officials as to what the response will be, either militarily, politically, diplomatically, going forward, the response to this strike from the U.S.?
We haven't heard anything yet officially. You have to remember it is the middle of the night in Iran. So we're still waiting for official reaction and confirmation from the Iranian officials. But they have made it very clear in the past on all levels of officials, political officials, diplomatic officials, military officials, even the president himself has said that if the United States does exactly what they did tonight, Iran will respond with a military response. So, and the U.S. interest in the regions would be the target.
And Dorsa, the Iranians have been clear that if the U.S. were to take this action, that they would retaliate by targeting potentially U.S. bases in the region. How much concern is there amongst Iranian officials about what kind of response that action would provoke going forward?
Well, there's a certain understanding that Iran has to respond to this act by the United States, this act of aggression, and they will call it an act of war. Their response, the level of response, is going to have to be decided, basically, by the commander-in-chief in Iran, that is Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. And given everything that's happened with what Israel has been carrying out inside Iran, it is unlikely that the response would be a muted one. We have seen the response towards the Iranian missiles and drones towards Israel over the past 9 days. We have seen Iran targeting various military, energy, and sensitive infrastructures inside Israel and the occupied territories. So it is going to be likely that the Iranians will have to show force when it comes to responding to the Americans.
All right, Dorsa, thank you so much for bringing us up to speed and for breaking that all down for us. We appreciate it. Please stay with us. We'll be coming back to you for more details going forward. All right, Shahram Akbarzadeh is the director of the Middle East Studies Forum at Deakin University in Australia. He's also a non-resident senior fellow with the Middle East Council on Global Affairs in Doha. He joins us now live from Melbourne. Sir, thank you for being with us here on Al Jazeera. Let me ask you first, based on what you're seeing at this hour, this type of escalation, the fact that the U.S. has entered the conflict and struck these 3 nuclear sites inside Iran, where does that put things geopolitically, and how much does that bring up the heat in the Middle East right now?
Well, thanks for having me, Mohammed. This is obviously a very dangerous turn of events. President Trump has stepped on a very slippery slope here. There were only 24 hours prior to this. There were negotiations, there were talks in Geneva between Iran and 3 European powers. And the end result was that European powers suggested that there's a scope for a diplomatic solution to now turn around and bomb nuclear facilities in Iran has basically made the United States a target for Iran. So Iran will feel obligated and really in a corner to respond to this attack, and that could be devastating for the region, devastating.
Shahram, where do you see things going forward in the hours and the days ahead? I mean, what kind of response do you anticipate from Iran?
I think Iran will try a 2-track approach. The first track would be appealing to international law, international institutions. The attack, Iran will argue, is illegal and under international law illegitimate. In fact, the Israeli attack, Iran argues, is illegal and an assault on Iranian sovereignty. So that's going to be an argument that Iran puts forward at the United Nations Security Council. And Iran has the support of Russia, China, and many other countries that agree with the Iranian position. The second option that Iran is also very likely to pursue at the same time is to get back at U.S. assets in the region and also utilize its various proxies and allies in the region to hit at U.S. assets. So we see a 2-pronged approach. And unfortunately, the military response that Iran is going to pursue, is very likely to pursue, puts the whole region at risk.
All right, that's Shahram Akbarzadeh, who's the director of the Middle East Studies Forum at Deakin University in Australia. Thanks so much for joining us here on Al Jazeera.